The crowd.
So we'll go ahead and get the meeting started. We won't have a quorum for item 1 and 2.
Yes.
But we'll,
And if I could, Mr. Chair, I'm recusing myself from agenda item number 1 because University of California Riverside CSERT is a potential source of income that has contributed to my employer and is materially affected by this item, so please come get me as soon as you're done.
we will try to remember to come get you for item 2.
If you want to vote on the home rule.
All right. So since we won't have a quorum, we'll go ahead and just do the presentation and then forward this to the board.
Thank you. So good morning, Chairman, or morning, Chairman of the committee, yes. And other members of the board. We have a presentation today to discuss the recognition of revenue, and this is for additional capability for our laboratory and air monitoring efforts regarding the air toxics efforts that we've been recently having. So just a quick background, the main concern that we've been looking at recently is hexavalent chromium. We've been doing extensive monitoring in the Paramount area, which consists of 36 total different sites that have been looked at since October 2016. We're currently running at over 20 of those sites. Additionally, we're looking with the assistance of the California Resources Board at 10 different schools. We're currently doing sampling and analysis at 3 of those schools. So we've also conducted on-site testing, and there's been extensive efforts from the compliance team in doing investigative sweeps, as well as some rulemaking efforts to conduct some of these long-term emissions reductions from some of the known sources. This has led to reductions at several of the facilities that we've been looking at that were identified back in that effort from October. So as you can see in this graph, the levels of hexavalent chromium have declined over time at those at least 2 of the facilities that we've been looking at, entering into orders of abatement in the December 2016 and January 2017 time frame. So there's a summary of statistics there. There's been over 2,100 samples that have been collected and analyzed in this effort, and many different inspections, over 150, as well as several curtailments as per the orders, which have effectively led to a temporary shutdown so that those emissions could be immediately reduced. This led into some of the air toxics effort led by the legal office, the initial deployment being in Compton based upon prioritization throughout the basin to look at different clusters and other different prioritization factors. So we deployed 6 samplers to look at the first 2 of these facilities as part of that initiative, and we have some statistics there as far as some of the efforts that are being conducted. As we've indicated in the past, this air monitoring effort is extensive as far as resources, the time it takes for the samplers to be deployed, the samples being taken back to the laboratory for analysis. It's very resource intensive, along with the source testing on site to conduct these source test surveys. So what we're looking at is providing some additional resources for what our current strategy has been, but also to provide some additional resources for kind of these more advanced techniques that can do near real time of total metals and hexavalent chromium. So staff has looked into several different possibilities and have entered into a recommendation looking at Aerodyne Research in combination with Desert Research Institute, who have capability to look at near real time total metals and also hexavalent chromium, and that's a huge benefit to the study. So this will allow us, instead of deploying all these resource-intensive samplers to do surveys, we can now do a survey and cover a larger area of space to help us prioritize where we want to do the more robust traditional capabilities. So Aerodyne has the capability for the near real-time total metals, and DRI has the capability for the near real-time hexavalent chromium. So another part of this proposed action is to look at another source of hexavalent chromium emissions. We now know, as part of new information from these studies, that heat treating of metal and plating can produce it. We've also have some preliminary evidence that maybe furnaces or something to look at. So staff is proposing to enter a contract with CSERT to look at furnace conditions that may contribute to hexavalent chromium emissions. So this action would be going with that. So the proposal is to transfer some money. We should able to note that EPA is also providing some funds for some laboratory equipment, $75,000. But this is also to transfer some money from the fund, BPRCO fund for additional samplers, as well as about $400,000 and change for the contracts for the near real-time metals analysis, and about $175,000 for the furnace study. So some of the recommended actions, as just kind of mentioned, recap, transfer about $150,000 for the capital equipment for laboratory and monitoring for the samplers, and then recognize the $75,000 from EPA for the laboratory ion chromatograph, which is what is used to measure hexavalent chromium, and then to spend $225,000 in total for laboratory and field equipment. And then, of course, transfer money to appropriate and recognize to the contracts for GRI and Aerodyne to conduct the near real-time analysis for the metals. And then lastly, issue some purchase orders for some gases that are necessary for some of the programmatic or toxics, as well as some other programs that in support of these programs. And that concludes my presentation.
Very good. Any questions?
So in terms of our dealing with Chrome 6, we identify sort of site-specific and regulate that way, but we need more information about things that might actually be causing it to enter the air.
So I think as part of our strategy, the air monitoring gives us an idea of an area. It doesn't necessarily specify a process or necessarily a facility sometimes, especially when they're clustered together. So it's really the combination of several different tools. We have our inspectors go there to do their routine inspections to look for potential sources. Our rule development team goes out there to look at other potential sources. And then we combine that with on-site measurements to do the analytical work to see if any hexavalent chromium emissions are coming from a particular process. This in total helps us, number one, identify the facility, but then also identify processes that then can be identified for potential mitigation measures, rule development, etc.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any speakers on the side? All right, very good. See this is sent on to the board. All right, someone go get Joe. Oh, Sean with us now, great. Welcome, Sean. We're just getting into item number 2.
I move item number 2.
Very good.
Second,
I have a motion and a second. Any opposed to moving item number 2?
No public comment?
Any public comment?
Brenda, you're on item 2.
Mr. Chairman, I think we need to do
A
a
roll call vote?
roll call.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, Dr. Lewis,
Aye.
Supervisor Kuhl,
aye.
Supervisor Nelson,
Good.
Chair Benoit.
Aye. Very good. On to item number 3. Go ahead, Michael.
Okay, great. Good morning. Today we're here to discuss the proposed amended Rule 1168. I know my slides. There we go. Thank you, Robert. Okay, so there we go. I'm in control here. All right, this particular rule applies to adhesive primers, sealants, and sealant primers. This rule was originally adopted in 1989. The last amendment was in 2005. But a more important date I think we need to highlight here is the fact the last time the current rule VOC content limits were amended were in year 2000. So that was 17 years ago. So we started this rulemaking actually back in 2013 because from the 2012 plan, as you may recall, we actually did have one of the control measures that sought for reductions from various coding type rules. We focused on this one again because of the time frame upon which this really hasn't been looked at. This particular rulemaking process, however, also spilled into our 2016 AQMP with one of our control measures there, seeking just a 1 ton per day reduction. Now, one of the things that was really important for us was to determine a proper inventory. So back in 2013, 2015, we did a survey. And the survey came up with some really surprising numbers for us because the numbers basically showed over double the amount of VOC emissions coming from these sources from what we were projecting in the AQMP. And so that was really surprising for us. What's not surprising, what has been going on, of course, with these types of industries is that it's a growth industry, which means that as you increase population, you're also generally going to increase the usage of these products. In addition, because of energy efficiency regulations and need for insulation and weatherizations of homes and commercial sites, we've also seen an increased interest in these types of adhesive and sealants. Thus, again, part of the growth industry. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, so just outlined over here, these two sort of what I would say set pieces of years, and I can explain why there's a gap. Again, in 2013-2014 timeframe, we did a survey. We had 8 working groups. We had 6 drafts of the rule. We had stakeholder meetings. We had proposed originally a 4.4 tons per day reduction that affected 22 of the categories. However, in those reductions, we also assumed the usage of TBAC and DMC because we were thinking at the time that they would be exempt VOCs. However, as you know, we then went on to an assessment of those and made a determination to back off of any of the potential toxics as a trade-off for VOC reductions. As a result of that, we went back to reintroduce ourselves to the rule again in 2017. We've had 3 working groups, 2 drafts of the rule. We have a preliminary staff report out, again, stakeholder meetings, and at this time we're proposing a 1.3 reduction affecting 18 categories. Now, this rule, because it hadn't been visited for many years, really needed a lot of cleanup. And we recognize the fact that, that these rules need to be cleaned up for the future. We may not go back to these rules for a dozen years. So, and we're not all going to be around for those. We want to make sure that we leave these intact for the future. So we went back, we clarified rule language, applicability, updated some definitions. I just want to highlight here that this is a challenging rule because there's a lot of different users, there's a lot of different manufacturers, there's distributors that are involved, so there's a lot of entities. And so we've been getting a lot of information and responding back to those and being reflective. One of the things that was mentioned in cleaning up is saying, over the years that we haven't touched this rule, other agencies like ARB or OTC, which is the Ozone Transport Commission, they have revisited these types of rules, and they've on the East Coast they have a model rule for consumer products, and so these guys have certain definitions of these types of products, and so we thought, well, it's a good time to go back and revisit. And so one of the changes we made just recently, highlighted to us by the insulation foaming community, yes, there is one, is about how we actually define our sealant. And again, this sealant definition has been in the books for dozens of years. And so one of the interesting things in their definition that was slightly different from us is the fact that they used the word weatherproof, and I think that was on purpose. And so to be consistent, we're also adding that in our sealant rule, which of course you can imagine the insulation community would be interested in that because it definitely brings them into the fold. With this regulation. Now, mind you, we've always viewed that insulation and foaming was already part of this applicability. We have to remember, as an agency that, we are seeking critical VOC reductions, and we've created, a suite of VOC rules in order to identify and target as many of those faces as we can in getting those reductions. Okay, so we kind of go through the rest of you can walk through these different points, no surprises, looking at reducing VOC content limits, reporting, harmonizing languages, test methods, exemptions, etc. One of the issues brought up was about applicability. So what we decided to do was, although, mind you, it's very clear to us and ARB, we've been working with them to make sure that there's clarity between the two agencies, but we wanted to also bring that message to the public. So we did things like little visuals here to kind of show that if you're greater than 16 fluid ounces, you are applicable under the 1168 rule. But if you've got less than 16 fluid ounces, usually these smaller consumer type products, if you buy this off the shelf at the store, you're going to fall under carbs, consumer products rule. If you're using exclusively manufacturing, you're going to be under our rule, et cetera. So we wanted to clarify that. As far as the VOC content limits are concerned, we're again targeting those 18 categories. Some of the things I just want to note that you'll see in, there's a whole mix of them we won't walk through, but some of those we actually got requests to allow a little bump up to allow them some time to make transitions to lower VOC. So we've extended compliance dates. We've also committed in some of those categories to technology advancements. One thing that's recent on this slide that's not part of your hard copy paperwork is a line item there called insulating foam sealants. We were requested by industry to kind of break out foam sealants to insulating foam sealants. They also made a request that be allowed to be a little bit higher than what the foam sealant's at 50. They wanted to be at 100, but at some point ratchet down to 50. Administrative requirements. So one of the new elements of the rules about reporting. So again, we talked about this inventory. So it's really important. And one of the critical tools we have in our toolbox, as they say, is about reporting. So that's basically asking them to come back to us so we have a better picture of this critical inventory. So we have sets of the emission profile. Our feeling is we need to have the submission profile of all regulated products, regardless of the VOC content. We've seen this in Rule 1113, by which we learned a lot about that inventory. They did a lot of work in architectural coatings going from 40 tons per day down to 11, and through our Rule 314, which is the reporting rule, we were able to learn how much work, good work that industry has done, and how much we don't really need to know further to ratchet them down. And we feel we want to work the same way with this rule as well. So we're looking at manufacturers, distributors. When it comes to end users, you will hear comments today from our UVEB rep about record keeping. However, there's no changes in record keeping, and we're retaining the exemption that if you're less than 20 grams per liter, which again is the UVEB, we will exempt them from that record keeping requirement. So no change there. One thing when it comes again to reporting, they would be subject to the reporting. But let's talk about the reporting. Look at this comparison between 1113 and 1168. This is the kind of surprise we had, because we're saying that this new inventory 1168, we're talking about an industry that's compatible with architectural coatings, and we know how much that has been to us. We have done reporting with 1113 through 314, and we've been bringing in fees from that for about $2 million. We're not asking for fees for 1168. With 1113, there's an annual reporting. For 1168, we've done a number of reiterations through the rulemaking process. We've come to an agreement of every 3 years until a certain point, and then it's every 5 years. We ask them for a look back of only 2 years and not 3, and we will sunset the reporting requirement. This means only 6 reports in 21 years. We don't really think that is too burdensome. However, as I noted that second point, you will hear that there's a thought that it is, that there's some burden in making that happen. The first point was basically just what I already reiterated, creating some clarity with regards to concern about overlap with ARB. We've made a robust discussion in the staff report, shared our correspondence we've had with ARB, and we've also added that to the rule as well. Some more concerns, again, you're going to hear from the foam sealant folks. They just recently told us that with the limit that we had is quote unquote unworkable. We don't feel that same stance. We want to say that the initial proposal, actually the initial research we did, we thought they could be ratcheted down to 20. With foam sealant, you have to remember, we're not really changing the constituent of what they're asking to do, okay? Not changing the foam. You're merely changing the propellant that pushes that foam. So that is really all that's changing. You're not changing the effectiveness. So we don't really believe that's considered unworkable. However, being responsive, we said, look, originally we said 20 grams per liter down to 2013. Let's back off a little bit, give you to 2015, extend the compliance date out 5 years, and promise for a tech assessment. I really think this is the best offer we can make. When it comes to the roofing industry, they also recently came to us. They asked for a number of subcategories. We just felt this was too late in the process. It was going to be, we don't know much about these subcategories. We cannot define them. We cannot create a new inventory from them. At this point in time, it would be an undertaking. So we're going to maintain those subcategories. However, once again, we've then asked for modest reductions. We've given them a little more time, and again, promised a tech assessment. So we're going to be taking this to the board in October, and we will be creating a working group. You're going to hear about a guidance document, something we want to promise. This isn't critical in the implementation of the rules, but we felt it was really important because some people really kind of, I think, need a support mechanism, and we want to provide that through this guidance document. And of course, outreach on any of these reporting requirements, because one of the reporting requirements is asking the distributors to go back to their manufacturer and tell them if they're distributing in Southern California. And that's what the manufacturer requested because they didn't want to have that whole burden on them in making that determination. So that's where we're at.
Okay. Any questions from our members?
They have to,
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure we probably have people that want to speak because there are a number of letters, but my question is specific. I know this is a really broad rule that covers a lot of items, but specific to PVC welding cement. And I realize that's a nuanced little area of this rule, but I bring this up for the following reason. We were contacted by a chemical engineer from USC does research in this specific area, PVC welding cement. This gentleman had memory of going through the rulemaking some time ago, along with doing some demonstrative testing for our staff to kind of show them what the limits of kind of where this stuff would no longer grab onto the PVC pipes. And we all use it. Our cities use it in the parks. We all have it in our yards. I mean, this is what irrigation is made of. We're not doing, old metal piping any longer. So according to him, he holds several patents in this area, and he said that the current limits right now are 510 grams per liter. He said you get down to 490, and every product currently known in the market at 490 fails. Below that, it just cannot be done, and it would be to his advantage if it could, because he is an opportunist, and repeat, he owns several patents in this area. He'd love nothing more than if this was possible, to at least be one of the people taking a shot at how to do this. But we're proposing a 425 grams per liter, and I'm just curious how we came up with that number and what our staff's opinion is of this gentleman's concerns and what he understands, as a chemical engineer researching in this space, what our current limits are. Where does 425 come from, and is that possible today?
Sure, thank you, Supervisor Nelson. So, yeah, PVC has a long history actually in this rule. It was introduced back in 1993, and back then it was expected that all these different categories would ratchet down. Some of those did, and some of those were challenged. Over the years, we've actually extended the reduction of those grams per liter to the point now that this particular category has no change for 20 years. However, there has been progress actually out there. We have had manufacturers who have told us that they were able to reach a 425 level, and I'm just noting, and that as of the 425. However, recognizing that when you have a product like that, then this is what we call technology forcing. It's basically having those other industry folks kind of catch up where some of those others are at. In saying so, we did decide that we were going to, again, extend that particular category out 5 years and add on a tech assessment for them to ensure, to kind of see the progress that they're making to make this happen. But there are products.
Are the products available on the market?
Yes, there are products that have been available. I mean, the challenge with a lot of these rules, mind you, is that you have the folks that come to us and say, we're doing this. We can show you this stuff. We have this. We put this actually in our staff report. We got listings of these types of products. But they're not ones that want to come out and, and speak bad to their fellow, I guess their industry folks. And so, that's kind of the challenge sometimes, to get them to speak up. You're always going to get the negatives.
Of course.
So,
Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry, obviously being remote, it's conversationally, it's a bit of a challenge. So I apologize if I butted in too early. Listen, I respect and appreciate that you have manufacturers. If they've got the secret sauce, maybe they don't want to tip anyone off. But I would hope that at least before we make a rule that the board can have an understanding, not that there's rumored to be, but in fact, how I would go by this if I was a landscape contractor. I mean, Valley Crest Landscaping is the largest landscaper that I know of down here. We see them off the freeways and building major parks and golf courses. Where are they going to go? They probably buy a lot of this product. They're putting in a lot of irrigation lines. We've got to be able to tell someone like that with some certainty, where are you going to go to buy this product? I would think. I've been here now for 7 years. I've seen us shoot at a target that we claim is well-defined when in fact it's not. And that makes me nervous, and it makes me more nervous that it doesn't make the staff nervous. They just think, well, people will get there. But, this does affect people's lives, and we all depend on products being available because these are sort of standard things. It'd be like requiring a different kind of laundry detergent. We all do laundry. At some point, we're going to have to make sure that we can buy some. So at the hearing in October, do we anticipate that at least the manufacturer that can actually do this to provide some evidence that it's really available and that they can, in fact, kind of come into the public light and say, yes, we are the ones, this is what we do, and it's not 75 times more expensive than the stuff Sean Nelson would buy at Home Depot this weekend?
Right. Sure. I mean, it's, of course, we can't force, manufacturers to do things, but however, again, this is why we decided to add the tech assessment element. We've done this tech assessment for many years in these types of situations, by which, we do want to see the progress of those, and we've come back and revisited the rule. We have revisited the rule on this particular product 1, 2, 3, 4, 5
Right.
times now.
Sir,
and
and
extended
forgive
it.
me, I ask you if you've revisited the rule. I get that. Remember, I'm a board member, I represent the agency, but I also have to deal with the public and try to be responsible. So this idea that just trust me, remember, I've looked at this a lot. You understood my question. And how many times you have or haven't looked at this rule isn't even responsive to my question. And I'm not trying to be mean about that, but I think you and I both know what I'm asking you is not how many times did you look at the rule. What I'm asking you is whether you can make someone do anything. I know the answer to that before asking. But they are our allegations. Will we, as an agency, be able to back up our statements that here is where you can actually get this and for how much, because it in fact exists, and you don't have to trust me, go to X location or go to X website, and you can independently verify for yourself. Because until that happens, I hope you can understand our problem as a board is that you have some secret information that none of us can verify, and I'm not questioning your veracity. That's just a tough standard for me to carry the flag forward on. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No problem, Sean, and I'll back that up with, I've got some PVC work to do this weekend.
Well, you're still good, because you have till 2023.
I understand
Yeah,
that.
but if you'd rather use the 425 than the
I'd love to
510,
see
wouldn't
the
you?
425,
I would too.
and where, can we buy
Okay,
this
we'll
right
work
now?
on that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Where can it be bought right now? Is this out on the market?
Yeah, yes. In fairness, it has not been up very long. We found it's only a 6-month window, but again, this is all part of the idea that they know when you give
Within
them
5 years, they should be able to.
Love to get some for next month, but
Sounds
anyhow.
good. All right.
Okay,
Sounds like a free market issue to me. Make a better product,
Yeah.
people will want to buy it, that's what I've been told by
That's a lot of
other
got-
people.
Well, Supervisor, the free market doesn't require mandates, so that would be actually the antithesis of a free market. That's a mandated market. And if you're the only one that makes it,
I'm not
in the economics class, they call that a monopoly. In this case, it would be a monopoly given to you by a government agency.
At staff just informed there were actually 2 products that are meeting that limit, so.
Okay.
okay. Do you have more questions before we take public comment?
Yes, Michael, you said that the UV/EV folks had to report, but they didn't have to do any additional record keeping. How are they supposed to do the reports if they're not having to do record keeping? That doesn't make
Right,
sense.
so the end user is subject to the record keeping. It's the manufacturers that do the reporting.
Okay, that
Yeah.
that helps, I think.
One step.
And then I was asked about the test methods, and this is just a general policy issue that comes up every time we come up with one of these rules, that it's stated in a way that the regulated entity has to be able to show compliance with more than one test method, but both test methods are considered valid. And to me, it doesn't make any sense, and I've said this time and time again, yet evidently it's in this rule again, that it says it's up to the discretion of the agency to choose which test method they have to prove. And that means that they have to go out and test their product on several test methods that can cost a lot of money. So either we have confidence in our test methods or we don't. I really think it should be that the regulated entity chooses which test method they comply with. If they're both valid or all 3 of them are valid, they choose the one. They say, go test it with this method. That's what we did. It makes sense to me. I don't really understand why this keeps coming up year after year.
Okay, we have Heather Farr here, our program supervisor, working on the rule. I think it's probably best.
We actually agree with this point, especially in this rule. There's so many different types of products that it is a little bit complicated. So there are several different test methods and directions that you can go, and then there are certain products that go directly into a test method. So we had some conversations about this, and after the rule's adopted, we're going to get a working group together, and between the lab staff and planning staff, we're going to develop a guidance document that'll say, if you have this type of product, you're going to go this way. If you have this type of product, you're going to go that way. So we're going to form a working group.
So in
to try
the
to clarify.
rule, is it going to say, it is still going to say that the discretion is with the agency as to which test method you have to demonstrate compliance?
That is what we're proposing in the rule, but then we're gonna have this guidance document to assist the regulated community to understand where their products will end up.
I'm gonna have problems with that.
Right, but we did also add, because there was this issue about, if the test method is appropriate for that particular product category, and sometimes those are really clearly defined. so there's
What I don't
not-
want to have to do is to force manufacturers to have to test their product with a whole bunch of different test methods in the event that the possibility that they get audited and we take it to the lab and say, well, we're choosing this test method, and they're like, oh, well, that's the one I didn't do.
So for us, when we get a product, we don't know what the VOC is, so part of the reason we have a flow chart is to determine what that VOC is, because a lot of times the test method depends if it's high VOC or low VOC. The manufacturer will already know that information because it's their product. So I think the guidance document will give that clarity for them to know, well, this type of product, this chemistry, if it's an adhesive, if it's a sealant, if it's a PVC cement, this is the direction we're gonna go.
I don't want to belabor the point a lot, but the rule language needs to reflect the fact that we're not going to require them to spend the money to comply with a whole bunch of different test methods that we all think that all of them are valid. They just need to should have to comply with any method that we think is valid. It should be their choice.
We can work on that.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll work on that.
Public comment? All right, public comment, Rita?
Did I make all your points for you already, Rita?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Tell Mark what I whispered in his ear afterwards. Have a handout. Good morning, Rita Luth, Director of Environmental Affairs for RATTEC International. Our main issues in this rule are the exemption from the overly prescriptive administrative requirements for our manufacturers, and also the inclusion of the test method for enforcement purposes. I handed out the cover of a RATTEC report magazine from 2001, which shows one of our medical applications. It is a photopolymerized hydrogel that is used for wound care. The second page has a list of UV-EV current and potential applications, and these are the types of operations that may be negatively impacted by the overly prescriptive administrative requirements to our manufacturers in 1168. During the 219 rulemaking, staff said that they needed to know where these operations were. How many different ways do we have to report them? We already have Rule 109, annual emission reports, the newly adopted Rule 219 low VOC material form, and by the way, we have yet to see the form and we have yet to see the outreach that the Printing Industry Association requested. I think there are already enough forms. Now 1168 would create new record keeping and reporting requirements that would not only impact the end user, but also the manufacturer. Subjecting so many different links in the supply chain to have to report the same information to the district is duplicative and burdensome. I was surprised to find out that medical adhesives, which is one of the categories in our industry, are exempt from the VOC requirements of the rule, but not from the administrative requirements. This indicates the rule is more concerned with paperwork than with actual emission reductions. We're down to less than 50. You saw some of the limits in the rule are 400. We're asking for exemptions for the materials less than 50. We request exemptions from Section F1, which is the reporting, and Section F2, the record keeping, or I think I got it backwards. In 2021, the lowest limit in the rule will be 20 grams per liter, and that would only be for one category. And the manufacturer that makes that adhesive is one of our members, and they have no problem with going down to 20. But why not, that's not until 2021. Why not give an exemption now for the ones that are less than 50? And then in 2021, we're open to going down to 20 for the exemption, since you have one category in the rule at 20. I can foresee a situation where patients in a San Diego hospital may have access to our technology that would not be available here in the South Coast, because suppliers may simply decide that they don't want to deal with the administrative burdens of this rule. On the issue of test methods, we're requesting that our method be specified in the rule. The second page in the handout shows the different rule languages used for various operations. We don't know why or how some technologies have a may be used language versus technologies that have a shall be used language. We are currently at a may, and we don't have the criteria for what constitutes a shall. We want to be a shall, and also we do have many concerns with the guidance document. We would not be supportive of that concept. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
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 So I'm the film industry that Michael said was surprised it existed, but we do exist.
State your name for the record.
Yeah, my name is Stephen Wyroni, and I can spell that later if you need it. I'm the director of the Spray Foam Coalition and Sustainability Activities at the American Chemistry Council Center for the Polyurethanes Industry. CPI and the Spray Foam Coalition thank South Coast and the Stationary Sources Committee for holding the hearing and for the opportunity to provide this helpful feedback. CPI represents the polyurethanes value chain, and the Spray Foam Coalition represents 18 of the systems houses and 13 of their suppliers that manufacture the vast majority of the foam sold in South Coast. CPI thanks South Coast for the willingness to meet with us over the last few weeks and in the response to our comments on foam sealants. While we support some of the revisions in the most recent proposal, including the updated definition of foam sealant and the improved timeline for the foam sealant technology assessment, we remain concerned with South Coast's intended approach in regard to insulating foam. Insulating foam does not meet the applicable definition of a sealant and should not be included as a regulated product category under Rule 1168. The primary purpose of two-component spray polyurethane foam insulation is to insulate a building, not to seal gaps or joints. Regulating two-component SPF insulation as a sealant ignores the sealant requirement in the definition to be used to primarily to fill, seal, or waterproof gaps, joints between two surfaces. And regulated insulation as a sealant introduces unnecessary confusion in the marketplace. In the draft staff report, responding to CPI's comments, South Coast stated, insulating foams fill wall cavities, the gap between two joists or studs, therefore insulating foams are within the scope of Rule 1168. These conclusions ignore the primary reason two-component SPF insulations are formulated and applied in buildings, to serve as insulation. Even though SPF insulation's versatility enables it to fill wall cavities, joists, or gaps, these properties are not the primary function of SPF insulation. Because the primary function of SPF insulation does not meet the applicable definition of a sealant, 2K SPF insulation products do not fall within the scope of Rule 1168. Therefore, the reference to and definition of insulating foam should be removed from the draft amendments prior to being sent to the board. Further, South Coast has not conducted a thorough review of the SPF insulation industry during the development of the proposed rule. The staff report does not contain an adequate description of how the 50 gram per liter VOC limit for insulating foam was developed. Currently, it seems it was selected without a survey of existing products. CPI's membership reports that 2K insulation can be closer to 100 grams per liter, and therefore, if South Coast intends to regulate insulation as a sealant, despite our concerns, the agency can conduct a survey of existing products. And then I'm running short on time, so I would like to address Michael's comment about adding weatherization into the definition of foam sealant in response to this letter. That's a significant change to the rule. It changes the entire scope of Rule 1168, and doing that at the 11th hour without notice and comment is extremely problematic. Thank you.
Just want to comment on that. So, at this point in time, if we came across one of his products as a foam sealant, we would have seen that. We would have seen that as subject to this rule. So we disagree with whether there's a subjectivity. We added this for clarity for your users so they can clearly see that you were asking for a vehicle to show. So we felt that was a response to the change in definition. With regards to removing the insulating foam, if we did that again, we would just consider that fall under foam sealant. Thus, you would be subject to a lower VOC. What we were trying to do there was separate those and give you some relief by adding the 100 grams per liter under a more specific category.
Well, I would say that insulation doesn't meet the definition of a sealant. It's not a sealant, it insulates. It doesn't fill these gaps. Yes, it can fill a gap, but not every application of the product fills the wall cavity. Sometimes you get 2 inches, sometimes you get 6 inches, sometimes you get 12. So you are regulating a complex product line with a definition that doesn't fit our industry because insulation is not a sealant. So I would challenge everything that you just stated in saying that our industry would have said that we were never in the scope of the rule because insulation is not a sealant.
Thank you for your
Thank
comments.
I'll just add to that, that's a relatively recent product, these types of insulation materials, and we're trying to include it in this rule. If it does become an issue, I mean, it could be a separate rule. Is that really needed when we're really close on this one? So that's just something to consider. It wouldn't be something we would necessarily forget about if we had to come back and do a different rule for this particular product.
Yeah, Kirk Coleman, Executive Director, Southern California Air Quality Alliance. The concern that I would like to bring before the committee is the provision of the sell-through provision. These rules generally have a provision that allows products to be sold for a certain period of time after they've been manufactured because they're on shelves and then they get bought up and used. The problem with the sell-through provision in this rule is that the sell-through provision is the same as what we call the use-through time. That is, it's 3 years from the date of manufacture it can be sold and used, which means someone could walk into the store, buy it, and the next day or a week later it would be illegal for them to be using it. And the problem is that while products are required to have the date of manufacture identified, they don't say manufactured on 9/27/2015. It says it's got a code, WXKQY3572 or something like that, which the manufacturer supplies that to the district, and they can look at it and say, oh, well, it was manufactured in July of 2015, so it can be sold through July of 2018. We would like to at least have some additional period, a use period, 1 year, 2 years, but anything so that the poor person who walks into the store, buys it, and goes out and plans to use it a month from now, the inspector doesn't come out and say, oh, you're losing that, and you're past the use-through date. So that's our concern. We did submit a comment letter to staff. It was not incorporated in the final rule. Thank you.
Thank you.
The only response to that is that typically we have found the shelf life of these types of products because of the sensitivity of adhesives and sealants is about a year. So, we thought the 3-year time frame was, that's not for all products, but I mean, that's.
I was going to say my PVC cement that's really old still works pretty well.
I've had some
used it already.
I've had some go bad on
But it's done its job. It's on the shelf.
I discovered when there was a big stream of water after a dog knocked up.
So, Heather, how have we handled this issue in other rules?
3 years sell-through is consistent with our other DSU rules. What we find is in that first year, the majority of the products get sold off the shelf. We give the manufacturers another couple of years so they don't have to have the resources to come around and pick up any stragglers. And then if the inspection team is out there and they find some really old product on the shelf, they just tell the retailer, take that off. It's no longer compliant with our regulation.
But are we going to job sites or to Joe's and I's backyard and looking at our PVC pipe cement?
I have never heard of
that.
Okay.
My recollection was Chairman Burke had a bunch of illegal products from a long
Are you reporting this? Or?
No, he said it out loud at a meeting.
You also have to avoid stockpiling of people.
Oh.
Things that do have longer shelf lives, you could buy 10 years supply, right? So you got to avoid issues like that, right?
Well, but if the shelf life of the product isn't that long,
Yeah.
they're not going to be able to do that.
PVC will have a very long, cement will have a long shelf life. It'll just actually evaporate out of the can. You can find some cans and Home Depot that have
I've had that happen.
You'll have that problem.
Right.
Go away.
You don't find out until it's too late.
You get the wrench.
Yeah, that's right.
It was Thanksgiving. There was nothing open.
All right.
Let's go. Good morning, Bill Pierce, the Boeing Company. I just had a comment or wanted to get a clarification between the final working group meeting, the definition with respect to repair and maintenance in I-10. Between that time and when the final draft came out that was going to the board, there was a change in the language, and now it just refers to the the site versus before it referred to the establishment, and there was a definition for establishment. And now it just refers to the facility, but there's no definition in that or what ties it back to that exemption. And I guess one question is, there's an expanded definition of architectural appurtenances, and if that was the intent, that's fine, but we're just trying to understand this change and just make sure that repair and maintenance is still covered for the facility.
Yeah, Heather can expound this further, but just a way of background, we got to this request about clarifications with ARB, and when we started going down that, what I would consider a rabbit hole, in defining the establishments, we started ourselves started having some issues with way ARB would define something and suddenly we found ourselves, wait a minute, now we're crossing over each other so we're like, let's not go there, let's just back off, this rule's not here to define where CARB stands or where we stand on this, so that's why we removed that establishment definition, because we, again, there were some issues with that. But yes, it's still, we're about repair, maintenance and repair. CARB has this thing about auto body shop, where they consider that part of their realm, so they consider that repair, and so it's a little different repair than we see this as, fixing something. So I think it's back to.
Well, and that's all
what,
yeah, so it's just, the exemption now refers to stationary stores, and we just want to make sure that was still the intent,
That's
that
the
it's
intent,
covering those type of operations.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
The record shall reflect. Thank you. Next. Good morning.
Morning. My name is Gene Lopez. I'm the Director of Development and Training for Sidner's Collision Center. We are an auto body shop with 14 locations here in the San Gabriel Valley and the Inland Empire. In the last workshop, I noticed, or I saw that the VOCs per day was somewhere around 4, and through their studies, it moved to more than 10 tons per day. And I just noticed on one of these slides that the architectural coatings were at 11 tons per day, and sealants and adhesives were just over 10. In the automotive industry, there's about a 3-to-1 or even 4-to-1 ratio of top coats over sealants. So you may have 1 coat of sealant and then 3 or 4 coats of top coats. Now, I'm not that familiar with the architectural coatings industry, but it would seem to me it would be similar. So I'm wondering if there's an overlap in the VOCs per day as it relates to architectural coatings and the sealants that go underneath them. So if we could maybe dig into a little bit deeper research on how did we come up with, as it was noted, more than double the amount of VOC tons per day in the research that we've completed so far. Thank you.
Thank you.
So architectural, inventory data is collected through us in 314. It's also collected on the state level, so that number's that. Again, the survey data was the one that reflected the 10.4. Frankly, a lot of that 10.4, by the way, is part of the foam sealants that we just heard from. It's a huge industry. So, and that's why it's a heightened interest in that. We will learn more, and that's why we have the reporting requirement, and we can report back when we start getting that data in.
Next. Bill.
Hi, good morning. I'm Bill Lamar, Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance. I hadn't expected to comment today, but when I heard Mike talk about technology forcing, chills went up my back.
The good old days.
Well, I know some people around the table here have been were part of the good old days. I used to manage Edison's Clean Coatings program for a number of years, and that was at a time when rule development, we were going through the furniture rule, the auto body shop rule, and some others, architectural coatings. And I can't tell you how many rainmakers came to us and appeared before the governing board claiming to have a silver bullet, or as Supervisor Nelson said, secret sauce, that they had the product that was going to solve everybody's problem, including air pollution. And either they didn't, or they didn't have the capacity to service the market. And we tested them all at SeaTac over in Irwindale. So that was coatings and some adhesives, and that was even UV at that time too. I think the same thing applies here with adhesives and sealants. and staff, when they formed this working group, to not consider so much what a manufacturer claims. They're probably the most unreliable source of information. Focus more on
Who do you represent?
end users,
Oh,
really,
okay.
yeah, people who buy these products, and the ones that get inspected by your inspectors, and also the ones that have to face disgruntled customers because they either have a bad paint job, or their house, their 20-year paint job on their house has only lasted for 9 or 10 years, and a number of other complaints. So for smaller businesses, it poses a real threat to their credibility and their market share. So I look forward, I hope I can be a part of this working group, but I would caution, relying on this term technology forcing.
Right, and just,
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if I could just respond for one moment. We do technology forcing rules, as Bill can attest to. This particular rule, many of the categories that we're reducing VOCs are based on existing products on the market, right? It might be a couple categories, and Heather could go into details of this couple categories where several manufacturers or a major manufacturer says, hey, that's not a problem, we can go ahead and do that. And for those, we've given lots of time. Even for somewhere we have a product, we've given lots of time for other manufacturers to reformulate. We have tech assessments to make sure we'll come back if the market doesn't go where it goes, or some of the. But on a scale of 1 to 10 of technology forcing rules, this is pretty low on our scale.
I guess I would say that I think somebody here said that this product had been on the market for about 6 months. That's not very long at all. Also, you have to consider too, if a product is that good, the performance is that good, and it's that cost effective, you don't need a rule to get people to buy it. I mean, they will do that because they want to please their customers. So,
Thank you.
Good morning, Howard Berman, appearing on behalf of Tremco, a manufacturer of adhesives and sealants, one of those unreliable ones that we just talked about. I just want to come in and thank staff. I think Michael, Heather, Nicole, and those that worked on this back before, at least regarding Tremco, have gone way beyond what's normal in hearing our issues. They even came out to construction sites at a couple of times. So I just wanted to let the board wearing hard hats. It was a summer day on top of a roof in Anaheim, and so I just wanted to let everyone know about their efforts. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course, that came from a manufacturer.
Yeah, I came from least reliable, was it?
Anyone else that has a testimony? Okay. I'll close the testimony. Any other comments?
CC 3 or 5 or wherever we put them. Before 15 people?
Yeah, if anyone in the other satellite rooms, or Sean, do you have any comments there?
No, thank you.
All right. Any other comments from my board members?
Information item.
Yeah. All right.
I could, but I won't.
And you will.
All right, with that, we'll continue moving on. We have a lot of rules, a lot of other items to get to here. Item number 4, thank you, proposed rule 415. Tracy, come on down.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, Mr. Chair, we're back. We're back with the rendering rule. As you know, it's been a couple of years since we've been back, but we're now coming forward with the rule. The issue of odors from rendering plants has been a long-standing issue. It's been a big issue for the communities of Boyle Heights, Maywood. It's a very distinctive odor, and it's something that the communities have wanted us to address for quite some time. It is an environmental justice issue for the communities, and we believe that. Through the years, we have received comments, that there's frequent odors. I mean, it's a very distinctive odor. But the fact that the facilities are clustered, it's always hard to trace back to a particular facility. But the community's reported health effects such as burning eyes, headaches, respiratory irritation, and this has been going on for some time. And for them and and we acknowledge it's a quality of life issue. But we started this rulemaking back in 2014. We're actually going almost a year and a half before we suspended rulemaking. We did have a number of meetings with stakeholders. We visited all the facilities during this time, and we actually visited the facilities, a couple of the facilities back in July. But as you know, at the last governing board meeting, Dr. Burt said this is an issue that we need to address, and we need to essentially pick up where we left off. So that's what I'm going to talk about here. So we had several working group meetings during the rulemaking process. We had 2 public meetings, a workshop and a consultation meeting. Both of those were out in the community so we could get the community involvement. During the course of the rulemaking, we had 3 public versions of Rule 415 and received extensive comments and feedback, not only from the facilities themselves, but also from the community and other stakeholders. We were in the process of actually finalizing our proposal. We had circulated our CEQA document for 30 days. We had received comment letters. We were actually in the process of responding to comment letters and preparing our set hearing, our 30-day documents. And throughout this time, you know, we've been keeping track of what's been going on with the facilities. Some of the permitting activities have been going on at one of the facilities. We do acknowledge that rendering is a necessary evil. You can't take these animal products, whether it be from the butcher shop or from a humane society, if you will, and landfill those. So it is a needed industry. There are finished products that come out of that are very beneficial. You get pet food, you get tallow. Some of the oils you can get are so good that you can use them in cosmetics and soap. But the meal can be used for like I said, for the pet food, and can also be used for fertilizer. But you can't landfill these items. You can't landfill the animal material unless there's an emergency situation such as what we had in the Central Valley when they had a heat wave and one of the facilities broke down when it was unable to take the cows that had passed away, nearly 1,000 I believe, and they actually had to landfill. So it takes an emergency order from the governor to do that. We do have 5 rendering plants in the Vernon area, 4 actually within the city limit, and 1 is right on the edge of Vernon. Actually, their parking lot is in Vernon, but the facility itself is in the city of LA. Out of that 5, there's 1 facility that we think, based on throughput, is just going to be subject to best management practices. So here's the location of the facilities. As you can see, D&D West Coast Rendering and Baker Commodities are right across the street from each other. It's really hard to tell where the odors come from. Likewise, Farmer John and Coast Packing, they're right next to each other on the same side of the street. And then Darling Ingredients is actually a little bit farther north. But as you can see, Boyle Heights is downwind of all of these facilities. In terms of the key elements of the proposed rule, on the short-term basis, we have implementation of best management practices. We have 11 of those. We have, on the long term, we're looking at total enclosures over certain processes, those being the receiving area, the process area, and wastewater treatment. Through the rule and talking with the facilities in terms of how much time is needed to put in an enclosure, the rule allows approximately 3.5 years for the enclosure to be built to allow for engineering, permitting, and then construction. And there is an option for a closed system, one where once the product goes through the grinder and starts going through the process, it's considered a closed system in some cases. We have closed systems, we have batch systems. So we have some provisions for that to where they only have to enclose the receiving area. And then we also want to have those enclosures vented to odor control equipment. So some of the other key elements, so we do have complaint signage that we want posted, much like we have for dust through Rule 403. Having an odor mitigation plan if there's ongoing odor issues and we're able to confirm odor events at a facility. And then we have BMP such as enclosures for raw materials, so they can actually, if they have to, they can drop the material outside of the receiving area, but they just have to push it in within a certain time frame. Through the process, we have made a number of changes to the rule language. And in fact, this afternoon, we're going to have an informational meeting where we're going to outline those changes since the last public version we had at the public consultation meeting. And some of those we're allowing in the closed system in lieu of the total enclosure, as I mentioned. We did have requirements for pothole filling to prevent the accumulation of the grease and the material that can then, bacteria can come up and it can be a source of odor. So we did limit that to the receiving area only. We have exemptions for limited use for small batch cooker operations, and then seldom used rendering plants, such as those that might be used less than 25 days a year. We also allowed facilities to deposit the rendering materials outside the enclosure, as I mentioned, but we have a time period by which those materials need to be pushed in so that we can prevent odors. We allow temporary storage of raw materials at integrated facilities, such as Farmer John, where there are times that they process chicken material for like chicken dogs, if you will, but their rendering operation is strictly for pork. So in the event that they process chicken, we allow them to store that and they can go to another facility. We do have alternatives for the ventilation standard, where they can have an inward face velocity reading in the event that they open their doors for ingress and egress of the receiving area. We have a design standard that they can use in lieu, where if they have greater than 20 air exchanges, and they can demonstrate that through a engineering calculation, then they'll be able to do that to demonstrate the effectiveness of the unit. And then we also have alternatives for wastewater enclosure, where if they have non-rendering wastewater mixed at greater than 30-to-1 mixture, then they won't have to enclose it. Or if they have a chemical oxygen demand of less than 3,000 for mixed water, then over a 3-year average, then they won't have to enclose the wastewater. So we do have some limits, and acknowledge there are cases when the wastewater is not odorous. So some of the issues that we've heard throughout the process is it's a one-size-fits-all. They believe that odor mitigation plan was, instead of specific BMPs, is more appropriate. We've added provisions for alternate BMPs as long as it meets the intent of the best management practice with EO approval. If they can demonstrate that, we can allow alternative BMPs to those that are listed in the rule. The feasibility and cost of the enclosure has been brought up, but we think with some of the provisions we made for a closed system versus a total enclosure, that will be able to accommodate some of those cost concerns. But we do acknowledge some of the facilities that are here, they have other facilities in other urban and rural areas that are totally enclosed. So we're looking to ask them to do for here what they do in those other communities. So there's always been a lot of discussion about the odors and the origin of the odors, being able to trace it back to the rendering plants. And we do acknowledge that that's hard to do, but we do know that the odors, they're very distinctive, they're getting into the community, so we know that something needs to be done. But we do have Rule 402 and have the authority to regulate odors, but it's really inadequate because of the way the facilities are clustered. So as I mentioned, we're having an informational meeting today at 1:30 to actually go through the rule in more detail, talk a little bit more about the process. We are going to set the hearing in October. Our 30-day docs will be out on October 4th, and we're going to have the public hearing and bring this rule before the board in November. Is that, Mr. Chair?
Very good. Board member comments, questions? Public comment? Come on down.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Hector Garcia. I'm the environmental engineer for Farmer John. I just want to thank the staff for the diligence and the work that you've done for the last 2.5 years. Thank you for coming out in the middle of July to the facility, which was awesome. And I really appreciate that. I really see the amount of work that you guys have put into the rule, the amount of changes and the flexibility that has allowed. The only thing that to just come up, which will cause just further discussions later on between staff and the work that Bob has done, is just cost analysis. But I'm just here to say thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, good morning. Jimmy Andrioli with Baker Commodities. I do want to say thank you to the staff. You guys have spent countless hours with us and going over everything, and we do very much appreciate that and want the board to hear that. Regardless of that, Baker has some substantial issues with this regulation still. With the latest rule language, we're still looking at tens of millions of dollars in cost to Baker. That is something that's just not feasible for our company to be able to have in these market times where the market price of the finished product is down. Some of the reasons we have some problems with the rule, the lack of NOVs over the last 15 years. 402 notice of violations, there's been one in the last 15 years. With the latest regulations, some of the changes the staff has made, there hasn't been adequate time. I'm seeing that we just got this finalized language a couple nights ago, very late in the evening. to check on the feasibility of these equipment installations. So we've had some issues in the past with the fire department saying we couldn't do some of the things required by this regulation and such. We've also still have some issues with the CEQA and environmental impact report that was issued, stuff that was never really addressed in the comment response period for that regulation, which I believe is like 45 days, 30 or 45 days comment period. We still have some issues with that were never addressed. Like they mentioned, emergencies happen, like what just happened recently in Central Valley. That happens because of limited capacity, because of lack of competition in those areas. You get those state of emergencies where this then becomes a human and animal health emergency. By disposing of these carcasses into landfill, you can contaminate the groundwater, you can have birds coming in and getting pieces of contaminated material, spreading those to other agriculture. It does create a very severe emergency, which is why the governor's office has to declare that sort of an emergency for us to be able to handle it. So when you take away rendering companies like Baker, who've been around for 80 years, you're opening yourself up to breakdowns at other facilities and lack of capacity to be able to handle those high temperature emergencies, et cetera. Excuse me. We've been asking for a lot of the time for having a more 410 style rule, which is the solid waste rule, where they had BMPs or odor management plan first, and then if there's continued issues and closure later. We haven't really seemed to have gotten a reason why that doesn't seem to be okay for this rule, but that's still something that we contend might be a better option since the facilities are so different from each other, and give you, rather than a one-size-fits-all, a facility-specific approach. And finally, I just wanted to comment on being called the necessary evil. I just want to say rendering is a carbon negative process, whereas landfilling is a carbon positive process. So we are cleaning the environment and protecting human and animal health. I don't see that as a necessary evil, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Board members, comments, questions?
I just address one procedural thing. So where we left off, we had already circulated the draft environmental report for the required period and had the comments in. So they haven't seen the final one yet. We are working on responding with the comments on the environmental report, and that'll be ready by the 30-day package for the board.
Okay. Does the staff agree that it's going to cost Baker Commodities tens of millions of dollars to comply with this rule?
We're still looking at all the numbers, and we'll be further evaluating that.
I'd be interested in
less.
I mean, where the divide in opinion is on that, because when we're passing rules that put people out of business, we have to take it pretty seriously. Obviously, I know that this is an issue. I've driven through Vernon, so I know that distinctive smell. And I also know that it is not just a necessary evil, but it does provide an actual important service. There's a provision where you can allow incoming product to stay outside and uncovered for an hour, right?
4 hours.
It's an hour.
1 hour, and that's not something that you can kind of game by just having it continually. New product coming in every hour.
I think the concern would be if it's out for a long time in the sun, that's when
you start becoming a big odor issue.
And one reason we allowed that is, like at one facility we have who has done this total enclosure, they have a very large building, and they actually bring the trucks inside the building, close the doors, the building's controlled, and the material's laid on the ground there. In Baker's case, they have limited space. So rather than a full building that can accommodate trucks that are tipping loads, this was to allow them, you can tip it outside, and in a reasonable amount of time, you can push it inside a building that can be much smaller. That was the accommodation we tried to make.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other comments or questions, board members? All right, very good. Thank you. We'll move on to item 5. And, 20 minutes left, so we need to move quickly. Hi, Susan.
I will move. So we're bringing to you proposed amended Rule 1420. Rule 1420 was adopted in 1992 and hasn't been amended since. Luckily, we've had other rules that have peeled off other sources in 1420. 1420.1 for large lead acid battery recycling facilities, 1420.2 for other large melting facilities. And these rules have really paved the road, and Rule 1420 is the remaining sources, and the rule is largely structured after those two rules. So we've worked through a public process, 3 working group meetings. We have another one scheduled for next week. Health effects of lead we've talked about many times in regards to the concern. Thousands of studies, the most vulnerable are children, negative impacts for brain development, IQ, and other health impacts. Applicability of the rule will be the remaining lead sources. We have a provision in there in regards to the amount of processed lead. We're dropping that from 0.5% to 0.05%. We have requirements for looking at the 2 structures for greater than and less than 2-ton facilities. And the rule applies to about 107 facilities. 15 facilities will have the more stringent requirements of looking at not only point source ambient requirements, but also enclosure requirements. So the overall approach is for these larger facilities that they're going to be looking at enclosures, housekeeping provisions, point source requirements. The smaller facilities will have to comply with housekeeping, record keeping, and then a conditional ambient monitoring provision. So general approach is what we've had in other rules, point source controls, same requirements that we have in 1420.1 and 2. Ambient lead requirements are the same concentrations in 1420.1 and 2. Housekeeping provisions are mirrored after 1420.1 and 2, but there's lesser requirements, less frequent. Building enclosures requirements, but no requirements for total enclosures to negative bear. And I can just run through these. General housekeeping requirements, weekly cleanings, similar to the other lead rules. Only the large facilities will do rooftop cleaning. There's this particular provision in the ambient requirement. 1420.1 and 2 have a mandated requirement for ambient monitoring. This has an on-ramp for ambient monitoring for facilities where if we monitor and we find that there's an exceedance of 0.15 micrograms per cubic meter, or there's a violation or an exceedance of their lead point source 2 times within 36 months. Then they're required to start their own ambient monitoring for lead. Point source controls kind of hit that already in terms of the similar requirements of the other lead rules. Other requirements for the rule include parametric monitoring to ensure that there's similar, that the point source controls are continually operating properly. Schedule for this rule, it's scheduled for a November hearing, set hearing in October. Any questions or comments?
Questions or comments? Public comment on this item? Very good.
Is that fast?
Move that along.
Thank you, that was good.
Yeah. Thank you.
And very complete, I thought.
All right, we'll go on to the next item. Dr. Fine, can you be just as fast and expedient?
Sure, refineries, that's
Maybe
always
some
good.
public
Yeah,
comment.
I'm being funny.
I'll go as fast as I possibly can. Just by way of background, monitoring in the community or at the fence line and refineries has been a topic of discussion over the last several years. There was an EPA rule recently that requires a certain type of benzene monitoring at the fence line and refineries, and Bay Area is in the middle of implementing their Regulation 12, Rule 15, which also requires fence line monitoring at refineries, as well as a provision for collecting funds to fund community monitoring in those same communities. There's been obviously a lot of community interest in this. There's a lot of activities. You've heard about all our pilot studies on advanced technologies for monitoring at facilities like refineries. You've heard about the Torrance project, where we are going to be installing a community monitoring system and a fence line system around the Torrance refinery. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. But one of the parts is our Rule 1180, that we want to be able to require facilities to do fence line monitoring and community monitoring in the communities around refineries. And we want this to be able to utilize some of the advanced technologies that have been developed recently. So we're really focusing on real-time continuous monitoring rather than collecting samples and waiting weeks to get results from the lab. So the communities, the facilities, the district, any other first responders, if there's an emergency, can get this data in real time so they can help in their decision making. We've had 4 working groups. We've had the public workshop. It's been very productive. We've worked through a lot of issues. There's still a couple issues to work on that we hope to be able to resolve before November. But you'll hear today probably some comments from the refinery groups or the refineries on the provisions. So we have an applicability threshold of 10,000 barrels per day, and there's currently 8 facilities, but now with this threshold it would probably come down to 7. We weren't necessarily wanting to include asphalt facilities, which are much smaller, so this is going to just focus on our larger and medium-sized refineries. And this will, again, provide real-time information to the public. The requirements as they exist now, 1 year after date of adoption, a plan would need to be submitted, and then the district would consider the plan according to the criteria in a guidance document that we're creating, and then 1 year after we approve the plan, it would have to be implemented in place collecting data. So again, there's a lot of aspects here. There's a fence line monitoring, community monitoring. The goal is public information, and then it will provide for some independent oversight of the data either at the district level or a third party, and then and there will be a public process in approving these plans. I've just listed some of the key pollutants that we would like to see monitored. This is kind of a basic list. Any refinery who does not use this material or can make a case that it's not important to monitor one of these pollutants, they can propose that in their plan. And there's also room to monitor more if that is needed. Again, we're working on a plan guidelines. We are trying to add as much specifics as possible so the refineries can know what we are expecting in the plans and the criteria by which we will approve the plans. There's been a lot of discussion around this area over the last couple of weeks, and we hope to get these guidelines out for a revised version of the guidelines out very soon for their review and the public's review. I won't go into details. There's a lot of slides here. We've heard about these open path technologies and the new technologies we've been working on. And then the community monitoring on the other side. You have the traditional approach of a monitoring station like that's pictured here, but there could be some other supplements to this using low-cost sensors that could be deployed on a wider deployment, and then a combination of all those types of technologies. We have provisions for a plan review process with time to correct deficiencies, and we're working on the language as we speak to try to accommodate some of the comments we've received. And then there's requirements for keeping the data and notifying us if the systems are down, have some downtime, or need maintenance. So one big issue is in the Bay Area, the fence line monitoring is the responsibility of the refinery. In our rule, we make it the responsibility of the community monitoring, also the responsibility of the refinery, with an exemption that if they can come to an agreement with us that we can recover our costs, that SCAQMD would actually conduct the monitoring. That's another area of active discussion about how that works, and I may hear some comments on that today, but it's similar to the Bay Area rule, but it's an option. In the Bay Area rule, the refineries would not conduct the community monitoring. We're trying to make it an option where if the refinery wants to do it with our oversight, that's okay, but have a provision that if they don't and want the district to do it, that we just need to make sure our costs are recovered. We've got key comments. You might hear comments that the 1 year and then the 1 year are not enough time. I think for the planning, we're being pretty generous on the plan development side, 1 year. 1 year to implement is typical, maybe a little tight, but we think it's definitely feasible. We've also heard about coordinating our requirements with the new requirements of AB 617, which nobody knows specifically what they are yet, because they're yet to be developed by CARB. So we're trying to make the timing and the requirements work, but also be flexible enough to handle what might be coming down with AB 617, because there's no reason to not have this monitoring be compliant with the intent of AB 617. Obviously, we don't want duplicate systems or major changes to systems once that all gets worked out. And then I mentioned clearly defining the technical requirements, and we're working on that in the guidelines as we speak. So we've scheduled to set the hearing in October, and a public hearing scheduled for November. We're going to try to hit that schedule. I think it really depends on getting our guidelines out and having enough time to see if everyone's comfortable with where we are. If we still have need some more time, you know, we can always consider a delay, but right now we're recommending setting the hearing at least in October.
We'll already have plenty to do in November if we have to wait a month, so.
Yeah, currently our December rule, there's only one rule scheduled for December, but given what's going in November, and there might be other delays, we don't, everything starts.
Yeah, okay.
There's 3 in November, so we don't want to see things keep piling up, but, you know, if everything goes as scheduled in November, then December probably has time to consider this.
Okay.
Happy to answer any questions.
Any board member comments, questions?
Slide 8, when you say it's what's being monitored at the fence line and in the community, PM 10 and PM 2.5 aren't being monitored at the fence line. Is there a reason for that?
I could go to staff and think the thinking on, what was the thinking on that?
Typically not a process pollute.
Yeah, so I think in the community, we're trying to be a little bit broader because.
I got a purple air device on the fence line at Torrance, and it's showing things that seem to be correlated with events.
Yes, so the fence line monitoring is a slightly different objectives for fence line and community monitoring, right? They tie together, obviously. If there's the fence line monitoring, the primary goal is if there's something happening, if there's an event, like there's real-time feedback to us, our inspectors, or the facility that something's going on. Okay. And you know, there's a couple processes that might emit PM, like if, you know, an FCC you blew up or something like that, but there's not a lot of other ones necessarily. But we understand the community is concerned about the pollutants that are most concerning to their health, and we all know PM is one of those. So it's not terribly difficult to add that to the community side. Whether it's needed at the fence line, you know, it's an open question. If it was proposed in a plan, we could approve it. Whether it's something we supplement, but you know, we're just looking at those slightly different objectives and trying to be efficient.
So you answered a little bit of the second question, which was what are the results going to be used for?
Well, again, there's multiple objectives, and it's different for fence line or community, right? So I think we're not designing it necessarily to do emissions estimation, right? Because that's a very difficult process. But on the fence line side, as I mentioned, you know, real-time feedback if something's happening to the facility, to the community, to us, to first responders. If there's an incident, you get that early warning. And if you do find something on the community side, you can immediately look at the fence line and see, hey, is it due to the refinery or something else? And if the fence line monitoring looks more or less reasonable, you might.
Given stack heights, you're not 100% sure of that.
But it is a piece of information, right? At least a positive piece. If you did see something, it would lead to that. On the community side, it's about community exposure to refinery emissions primarily, but there's also other facilities around there, and so that is real-time information in the community about what they're being exposed to, real-time information to us about what might be going on in the community, long-term exposure for, you know, chronic effects or cancer effects in the community. So there's overlap, but there's slightly different.
And lastly, it sounds that this isn't quite cooked yet. You're working on the guidelines, so it sounds to me like you're open to, if you can't get it all done, to taking your time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we're in active discussions and hopeful we can come to some agreement on the guidelines.
You give us signals that you need board cover to delay things.
That's not
just let us know.
Not necessarily yet, but I'm saying staff is not opposed to a delay if we can't get where.
I'll try to figure out what that signal says.
But we've been in active discussions, and there's a few key issues that we hope to work out. It's not, we felt it was cooked, but we got a lot of comments on the guidelines, so we're just trying to beef that up a bit.
Supervisor?
Phil, we're getting a number of sort of inquiries about how the community can help with monitoring. And they're talking about, you know, collecting data. What's the best way to help them connect? Because gathering data is one thing. Analyzing it is something beyond their ability.
So I'll speak a little bit about this program, and then maybe Jason can go in. We have a lot of other programs in that area. But one of the things we want to do in this program is to get the data to the public in as real time as possible.
Right,
but not
our
just
data to them.
Yeah, but not just throw it on the screen and say, here's a number, right? But really put it in context with what you might expect, with what baseline is, with and all the health information and make it in a way that's very user-friendly. And that's some of the stuff Jason's been working on as well.
It's a little tough. There's no health standard.
So it's a challenge for sure, but that is part of this program. And so part of what the facilities will be proposing to us in the fence line and maybe the community monitoring is, what does that look like? How are you going to do that? What expert do you have that's going to be able to help translate this information? And of course, if we're doing the community monitoring, at least, we would be responsible for those same functions.
So as Phil mentioned, Phil, Lucky, and myself have been heavily involved with the SPEC program, and they've recently been awarded the STAR grant from the USCPA, and the main purpose of that is to engage the community, to educate the community, get feedback from the community on air quality data from low-cost sensors, but also I think as we become aware of data that they themselves can deploy, it makes them more generally aware of air quality data in general. So that helps empower them to understand and ask questions and start those collaborative or continue collaborative relations with understanding the data and potential uses for that data and sets expectations. Because not all air quality data is equal. There are many different types of pollutants, there are different types of health effects, so it is a very difficult world to navigate as far as when looking at the data and potential actions that they would want to take with respect to that data. So a large focus of that program, and I think also it's fair to say the agency in general, to be able to communicate air quality data to the public. And the STAR grant is a way where we are actively engaging different communities across the state, working with our other fellow air quality agencies and their communities to do this effort.
We're also having an air quality sensor, making sense of sensor data conference on the September 27th, 28th here. So that'll be a very good couple of days to talk about how to deal with the data and the communication and you know, how the state of the sensors are.
And the Torrance experience, which is going to come maybe, a little bit ahead of schedule of this rule, is going to help us understand some of those issues too, about how to deal with the data coming from a community and fence line system.
It's going to be a learning experience for all parties.
I think so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, public comment on this item?
Good morning. I'm Bridget McCann, manager in Southern California region for Western States Petroleum Association. I'm a new member of Home Rule, as you heard earlier.
Welcome.
Thank you. So WISP and its members, we really appreciate the work of SCAQMD staff on this role and the collaborative efforts they've really made to consider stakeholder comments and concerns. WISP and its members, we've really participated fully in the rulemaking process. We've attended and made comments at all 4 of the working groups. We've provided 3 written comment letters on this rule. We've met with staff, and we've also provided verbal testimony at the public workshop. So despite the best efforts of staff and stakeholders, the timeline for this rule has been very short for a rule that has as much technical detail and also has such community impact. So the draft monitoring guidelines, without which this rule really can't be implemented or even really properly understood by stakeholders, it was initially released 1 business day prior to the last working group meeting. So it's really difficult for stakeholders to be able to review and then try to provide meaningful comments or feedback with that little time frame. And now staff, they've indicated they're going to be doing heavy revisions on the next draft, and we have a working group this coming Thursday in Wilmington, and that still provides a really short deadline, 1, for them to be able to complete their technical work, and then 2, for us again to review and provide that type of feedback. And as you saw, the rule is currently scheduled for set hearing next month. So WISPA, we're respectfully asking that more time is given for staff and for stakeholders to complete the collaborative process that's already going on with this impactful rule. To please not rush this process when critical technical documents that are key to how it's going to be implemented have not yet been released and reviewed by stakeholders and members of the public. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Next.
I guess I have a minute to say good morning. Kurt Coleman, Southern California Air Quality Alliance. Sort of to tag along with what Bridget said, we're concerned about the pace with which this is being pushed. the guts of the rule really are the technical guidance document that says what the monitoring plan has to have to be approved. And that has not, we haven't seen anything close to the final version yet. And this is, we think it would be really helpful to give the staff the time to do a good job on this and let the industry work with them on it. Basically move this to December and give us that extra month to work on it. We prepared a letter from various people, coalition, that we will be providing to Wayne. It's addressed to Wayne. Hopefully he was going to be here today so we could give it to him. I'm reluctant. Yeah.
I'll be happy to.
Okay. Well, Wayne for the moment. And it basically addresses the concerns we have with the pace of the rulemaking. This is sort of the poster child for our concerns, but we've also seen it in several other rules recently. We understand there's a lot of rulemaking that's going to be coming down the pipe, and you've got to get stuff done this year because there's a lot more to do next year, especially with winding down reclaim. There are going to be a lot of rules that need to be addressed there, and AQMP implementation and things like that. But I think it would be to everyone's benefit if we could get an extra month on this rule. So that's our request.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Hello. Florence Pearson with the Del Amo Action Committee. And I wasn't really planning to speak, but what I want to say is this. I am convinced that this fence line monitoring at the refineries and the community monitoring that partners with it is one of the most significant things that the Air Quality Management District is working on. I know it does present a challenge, and I know it is a work in progress, but I encourage the district to continue this work as one of the most meaningful things you are doing to protect air quality in this basin. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. It is very important work, and I think you just echoed the feeling of our chair. I've heard Dr. Burke talk about this for a long time. I think since the first day I was on this board, we talked about fence line monitoring at refineries and where he wanted to get with this. Been on the table for a long time. Yeah. Other comments? No. I'm concerned about getting us to the finish line, but I'm also concerned about making sure we do it right. And staff didn't seem too upset with the idea of maybe an extra 30 days. I think that might be appropriate, and this might take us in there. And then also help us even out between November and December a little bit. So I'd rather have it right once and not have to come back again. So if we could go to December on this, would be my thought. Anyone opposed to that?
Whatever it takes.
Okay.
I've waited 6 or 7 years. I think I can wait another month.
I'm with you.
But just a month.
Yes. Fair to that. All right, with that, items 7 through 10, can we bring those back next month? Great. We have the written reports attached, item 11 and 12. Any questions on those? Any other business from the board members? Any public comment? All right. Kumbaya, we're done. Thank you, everyone.